Well, this morning we are going to I say continue, but it's been a few weeks since we've been here together. But we're going to continue to talk about friendship and what the Bible teaches us about friendship and how to think about friendship. I just want to share one of my favorite friendships in history. There's been lots of great friendships. Behind every great person is usually a great friend. But one of my favorites is the relationship, the friendship between J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. You might be familiar with one or both of those names. They were two of the greatest writers and two of the greatest fantasy writers in the early to middle of last century. And what some people don't know is even though they were both individually great, they were incredible friends. Both of them were followers of Jesus Christ. In fact, Tolkien, who was Catholic, had a great effect on C.S. Lewis, who was part of the Anglican Church, coming to belief in Jesus Christ. They were deep friends. They were actually part of a literary group that's now famous called the Inklings. Many of the professors and authors in that group were friends, and they would meet together and discuss their stories. So C.S. Lewis obviously wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and other works. And even though they were great writers, when you read their letters between the two friends, you see that actually, though they were good friends, they were fairly critical, both in private and for Tolkien, sometimes publicly, of each other's work. Lewis, though he would gush in public about Tolkien's work, he thought that Tolkien was way too in-depth, worked way too long and hard, and thought too much about his works. C.S. Lewis, for example, in 7 years pumped out the 7 books that made up the Chronicles of Narnia. Tolkien went more than a decade without publishing anything. On the opposite end, Tolkien thought that Lewis was way too loosely structured. He mixed mythologies from different traditions and backgrounds, which bothered Tolkien immensely, and he thought he worked too fast, and his work was, quote, stiff. Here's what's amazing to me about this friendship is that they remained friends, and both of them, their works, actually became better because of that friendship and the honesty inside of it. Both of those men, I think we could say, slayed literary giants, two of the most best-selling, well-known series of all time, and in the background was this friendship. That's my introduction this morning to a biblical idea that I want to introduce you to this morning. We're going to explore this together, that behind every giant slayer is a great God and a great friend. Take a guess whose life we're going to look at today. Behind every giant slayer is both a great God and a great friend. I want to remind you that it's our God who brings us into relationships with others, and so it's a God who gives us friendships and people in our life. These things go together. And so I'm going to have you grab a Bible. If you don't have one, there should be one in front of you. Pull out your Bible app on your phone. You can turn to 1 Samuel Chapter 18. We're going to continue our series, Better Together, looking at what the Bible says about friendship. And real quick recap, week 1 we talked about this idea of hospitality. It's kind of the pre-friend stage. Hospitality, as we defined it, is taking strangers in our life and turning them into guests. Old Testament, New Testament, preach, teach that we should be hospitable. Jesus shows us what this looks like. The second week, we looked at initiating deep friendships. You might remember we talked about Aristotle. We call it a friendship ladder. It was this look at from shallower to deeper kinds of friendships. He pointed out 3. One was a friendship of utility. That means that you have a friendship with someone because you gain something from one another. There could be a friendship of pleasure. You have fun together. These aren't bad, but they're just a lower level of friendship. And then there's a friendship of virtue. And we're really leaning into that idea, and we'll see this morning. A friendship of virtue is when we care about the other person as a person, and not only who they are, but what they are going to become. So we're going to take a look at what is probably the greatest friendship in the Bible. If I was to say, Bible, friend, go, you would probably say David and Jonathan, or you might say that. They have one of the most well-known friendships in the Bible, and we find it in 1 Samuel 18, 19, and 20. So a little bit of a heads up. We're going to go quickly through these chapters. I know after our Ruth look at Ruth a couple weeks ago, a few of you said, man, we went through that so fast. We're looking for some friendship lessons out of this, and so we'll cover quite a bit of ground. But as important this morning to 18, 19, and 20 is the context in which the author of 1 Samuel tells us about the friendship. Because Samuel decides to tell us about David and Jonathan's friendship right after the events of chapter 17. So if your Bibles are open, you'll notice that chapter 17 is one of the most well-known stories in the whole Bible. It's the story of David and Goliath. Now, you likely know at least parts of this story. David takes on this Philistine giant. He slays him. He defeats him. And if you're following the life of David, you know from that moment forward that David's star is rising. We have all these things in David's life that start going right. We have Saul, who was the first king, was the one who wasn't able to defeat Goliath. From then on out, if you're following the story, his star is sinking. So we have Saul walks further and further away from the Lord. David gets closer to the Lord, starts following after God, and his star kind of rises. Right in the middle of this, we're told that behind David was a good friend, Jonathan. Here's the implication. David not only had solid backing from God, but he had solid backing from a friend who God put in his life for these moments. A great giant slayer needs a great friend. Friends, for you and I, if we're going to slay giants in our life and do great things for the Lord and work as he intended us to, it requires great relationships in our life. So we're going to talk about what that looks like this morning. Going through this story, I want to give you 4 qualities of what I'm calling a giant-slaying friendship. Ready for this? 4 qualities. Number 1, committed love. A great friendship needs committed love. We'll talk about what that looks like. Love might seem like a weird word for you in the context of friendships, but it's the word that shows up the most to describe the relationship between Jonathan, who was, by the way, the son of Saul, and David. So immediately after this Goliath story, we're told about Jonathan. Here's what the author says about the relationship. Chapter 18, verse 1. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan, notice this, became one in spirit with David, and he loved them, highlight, circle, underline, loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic, and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Notice the words used here immediately in 4 verses to show us that they had this really tight relationship. It uses the phrase, one in spirit. Some translations say here, knit. I picture when I hear that word, conjoined twins. I think the author is telling us that the relationship was something like that. They're often together. They're sharing life on life together. We're told that they made a covenant is the word here. I want you to hear when you see the word covenant, just that they committed themselves to one another, to that friendship. We'll talk more about this. This is a huge feature in their friendship, that they were committed to one another. And Jonathan loved David and vice versa as himself. This is the definition of a friendship of virtue. He loved who he was. He loved who he was becoming as a follower of God. In other words, they had a real friendship. And then Jonathan demonstrates this true love with this act of generosity. He gives everything, not everything, but gives some of what he has, what's important to him, to David. When Jonathan dies, spoiler alert, in 2 Samuel chapter 1, he died at a young age. We're told that David loved Jonathan more than he loved the women in his life. And if you know David, he loved women a lot, but he loved Jonathan. It's a way of saying they had a deep, committed love and friendship. Now, despite some modern readings of this that try to make the love between David and Jonathan something other than it was, the word love here, by the way, is not a romantic one. The word love has political or diplomatic connotations that are often used in the Old Testament. And so what it's showing is that they had a deep friendship. It's the kind that's kind of lost to us today. We often only think of relationships in terms of romance. In fact, think of the word relationship. If you say, hey, they're in a relationship, that's where your mind goes instantly. We've kind of lost this picture of a deep friendship, but that's what they had. We've completely lost this notion, but it's there in the Bible. In places like Proverbs 17:17, which says this, "A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity." So there's that word love. Proverbs, by the way, or much of it, was written by Solomon, who was a son of David. Now, he never got to know Jonathan. Jonathan was deceased before he was born. But I kind of think that, I picture that maybe here was Jonathan, or Solomon, who had heard stories of his dad's friendship. And when he is writing his wisdom and recording it, and he thinks of a friend, what does a friend look like? A friend looks like this. A friend loves at all times. Being a deep friend means loving them for who they are. Quality number 2, courageous truth. This is a big one, I think a hard one as well. If we're going to have a deep friendship, it's going to take courageous truth. Now real quick, I previewed this a little bit, but Saul and David, remember, Saul's on the throne. David kind of has a rising star. Jonathan is the son of Saul. And so we find shortly after this story of David and Goliath that Saul, who feels threatened by David, who's much younger than him, wants to kill him. Jonathan then, his best friend, is put in a situation where he has a choice to make. Am I going to be for Saul, who's my dad, who's not following after God and wants to kill my friend, or am I going to be honest with David about what's going on? Which leads us to the beginning of the next chapter. Join me in chapter 19. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out." So here is Jonathan. He's left with a decision to make. He makes the decision in that moment to be honest and tell the truth to David. And so verse 7 says, so Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation. Can you imagine what this was like for Jonathan, who's caught in the middle of this, to be honest with David about what's going on? It's at a great cost to Jonathan. It would have been easier to side with his dad, who was obviously not following the Lord in this. But at great cost, he told the truth. Here's what I don't want you to miss from this. For a friendship to be deep and growing and redemptive, it's going to take the truth, and sometimes the hard truth. There'll be moments, and you've experienced this in your friendship, where it takes being completely and totally honest with that person, even when there's great cost, about something that's happening. Maybe it's something that they did that's affecting someone, or something that they don't see, or maybe it's something between you two that you need to wrestle with. It's hard to drop that truth bomb. I don't know about you, but I've had situations in my life where I know that I've needed to have a conversation with someone. Sometimes it's so hard. Sometimes with a good friend, it can be so hard to have that conversation. So what do we often do? We justify not telling them. And the reality is, when we start doing that, it starts eating away at our friendship, or limits how deep that friendship is going to go. I love this. This is from pastor and author Brian Loritz. He wrote a great book a few years ago called Enduring Friendship, Sticking Together in an Age of Unfriending. And he writes this. He says, when we do not tell the truth, we risk, we guarantee the death of the friendship. Notice the power in those words. Run your own cost-benefit analysis, and you'll see that the best course of action is to stand squarely in front of the mirror and face the beast. He uses this language of cost-benefit analysis. In other words, he's saying when it comes to telling people the truth, think about the cost of that, of losing that relationship. And the benefits of friendship are huge. And the cost of not telling the truth is going to deteriorate that friendship. Later, he writes this: without truth, there can never be a friendship of substance, and over time, the friendship will fade to the stands in the marathon of life. In other words, Loritz says one of the key things we need to understand about friendship is to be willing to tell the truth. Here's another proverb from Solomon. Proverbs 27:6. Wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. That's the first phrase in there. Wounds from a friend can be trusted. Hopefully, if that's a God-honoring, deep friendship, we should be able to take those wounds. And sometimes it's hardest when someone's telling us the truth. And how are we going to react when they do that? But wounds from a friend should be welcome if they're really a friend. Quality number 3, unwavering loyalty. I'll go through these next two a little quicker. Jonathan's commitment to David, which is all over in this story, is best captured in chapter 20, verse 4, which reads, Jonathan said to David, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it for you. Now, this is a little bit later in the story. Saul is all out trying to kill David. Jonathan actually helps David get out of the house of Saul and escape. And Jonathan, because he loves his friend and has made a commitment to him, because he's a loyal friend, helps David get out of there. He's loyal to David over his dad, ultimately because he knows David is following God and his father's not. If you are going to make it through friendship, here's a third quality, it's essential that we have unwavering loyalty. And by the way, it's only in the combination with the truth that this works. Otherwise, it's blind loyalty. And we're not called to blind loyalty to anyone, but when we can be honest about what's going on in our friendship and our lives, we can also choose loyalty. Continued commitment to the friendship. It's saying, this is valuable, our friendship is valuable to us, I want it, and I'm in it for the long haul. And at times it means saying, whatever you want me to do, I will do it for you because we're friends. Last proverb this morning. Some good proverbs here. Proverbs 18:24. One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. We want reliable friends. That loyalty was Jonathan's greatest quality in David's life. And quality number 4 is a shared faith. A shared faith. One of the things to note, and I think this is really important, is that both David and Jonathan, what was key to their friendship was that they were both devout followers of God. We see that all over in the story, but right at the end of chapter 20, before we kind of lose Jonathan, at least from the narrative's perspective for a while, they part ways. David ends up running away from Saul, and Jonathan says to David, verse 42, go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever. Then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town. Notice twice in that little verse, that's a big verse, but a few sentences, twice we see Jonathan talk about this commitment to the Lord. Their friendship is in the name of the Lord. The Lord is their witness. They're being God-honoring in what they're doing, and we see that their faith. Both men were not only faithful to each other, but they were faithful first to God. Here's what's at the heart of their friendship is following after God and his will together. Having faith in God is what makes a really deep relationship possible. And you might be going, does that mean that if I'm in a friendship and that person's not a follower of Jesus, we can't be friends? Absolutely not. You will have friendships in your life of all sorts of shapes and sizes and commitment levels. I'm just saying that if we really want to get in a friendship to the deepest place, It's going to take faith in Jesus Christ. Think about it. If you, as a person, find your deepest potential in Jesus Christ, and I believe that you do, then our relationships with others find their deepest potential in God. I think this is a great example or illustration of what the church is. You're unlocking what God has intended for us, or for people as friends. So we see those four qualities behind every giant slayer is a great God and a great friend. So we've been doing this throughout this series. I've given you what I'm calling a better together principle. So just to kind of get us refreshed again, our first practice, week 1, was take initiative in hospitality. Key for all of us in our lives. Number 2, be patient in building friendships. So friendships take time. And here's number 3 in light of this morning and the story of Jonathan and David. Practice number 3, maintain stability in your relationships. We want to be good at friendship. It's going to take stability, like David had with Jonathan. Regular maintenance of your friendship. I think it starts with realizing that friendships are good and God-ordained. We've seen that in these passages and many others in the Bible. And just like your vehicle or your house or many things in life, it takes regular upkeep for us to have good and deep friends. Now, I'm standing here this morning and realize at some point in my life, I'm not naturally good at this. It takes a lot of work for me to keep up with friends. I realized this several years ago. I had a best friend in my life. We'll call my best friend growing up. We were tight. We were probably knit together. And a few years ago, it was his birthday every October, and I knew the date, and so I pulled out my phone and I write him a birthday message. Happy birthday, man. Cake emoji, celebrating hat emoji. You know that one? Classic. And I hit send. It turns out the blue little bubble. And I'm staring at this, and I realize right above it, I'm one of those people, I almost never clear my text messages. And I look right above it, 365 days previous. Happy birthday, man. Cake emoji, celebratory emoji. And I realized right then, we're not doing very good at this friendship thing. Okay, he was worse because he never responded. But I realized, right, we can think sometimes, hey, we're really good friends, and some friends, I have them, you probably have them, can withstand long periods of not being in contact or being across the world or whatever. But so this is a disclaimer for you. I've struggled in my life and had to be more intentional. Some of you are great at this. But what does it look like to maintain stability? I want you to look, if you've been taking notes, back on those 4 things that we learned from Jonathan and David. It takes love. It takes truth. It takes loyalty, probably, talking more than on birthdays, and it takes faith. Now, I want to say before we get in this, you may be tempted, as we all are when we hear sermons and teaching, you may be tempted to think of a friend and put them through this paradigm and go, how good of a friend are they being to me? But as we get into application, I want you to think about it the other way, which we all should be doing anyway. I know it's natural to think, I wish someone else was listening to this. But how are you at being a friend? Maybe there's a friendship that comes to mind this morning. So first, I want you to think, we'll take a little out of order. Are you a loyal friend? What does loyalty look like in a friendship? I love this advice. You maybe heard this as a common advice. Be slow to make friends, and even slower to walk away from them. Be slow to make friends. That's kind of age-old advice in life. It's not good to just rush into friends and influences. Be slow to make friends, but even slower to walk away from them. I think that's good advice. I heard this advice. I couldn't imagine this a few years ago from some health teaching that said, when you eat a meal, it should take you, if you're slowing down and enjoying it, it should take you as long to eat the meal as it takes to prepare it. I remember thinking, I don't do anything close to that, right? You take a long time to make it, and then you just scarf it down. But I thought friendship's kind of like that. We should take as long to enjoy the friendship and pour as much into it as we do building friendships. Friendships take a long time. Friendships take years to get really deep relationships. But how often are we willing, I think we can all relate to this in some effect, to burn a friendship down over some dumb thing, even though it's taken us so long to build it? We need to run that cost-benefit analysis. We need to realize that the value of friendship is great. We have to want the friendship. Or here's another helpful reminder in this vein. This is from Brian Loritz again. He says this little quip about friendships. When I win, we lose, as a general principle. When I win, in other words, if I'm just going for what I want in this friendship, when it's about me, we lose. We need to be willing sometimes to take a back seat for the friendship. We have to be willing to stay engaged when there's conflict. Next week, we'll look at the fourth series in this message. We'll talk all about what happens when there's conflict. There's always conflict in deep friendships. But friendship is worth it. Another thing we need to think about is our love and truth. I'm going to take these two together. I think they're often related. The Bible talks about speaking the truth in love. So let's take those two together. What does it look like to both tell the truth in love and care about someone? I'm actually stealing something this morning from a Bible study. Our men's Bible study did this last week. We're going through a Mark Batterson study, and he used this paradigm. It's actually from an author named Kim Scott, talking about what it looks like to both care and confront in our life. And so I'll put this up on the screen. It looks like this. You'll see these 4 quadrants. On one end, there's caring about someone and not caring, failing to confront and confronting them directly. And she says when we do none or one of these things, we fall short of the ideal of relationships. And again, this fits in with what the Bible teaches about speaking the truth in love. So in the first quadrant down here, we have failing to confront and not caring, or failing to confront and caring personally. So we care about them, but we don't confront them. She calls this ruinous empathy. So it's empathy because we care for them, but we don't want to tell them the truth about what's really going on. And so it looks like it's something that's great, but it's actually to their ruin. We need, me included, we need people in our life who are willing to tell us the truth. If we're on a path to a train wreck, someone needs to tell us. Oftentimes we think, well, I'm being nice by not telling them this thing that I should be telling them. And so we stand by while the other one makes bad decisions. Imagine what would have happened if Tolkien didn't have Lewis or vice versa, who were friends who were honest and made them better. God gave us friends for just that reason. Now, opposite, if we confront them directly but don't care about them personally, you might have had people like this in your life. Scott calls that obnoxious aggression. It's someone who's aggressive. They're telling us the truth, but there's no really care for who we are or who we're becoming. They just want to blurt out the truth. And truth without love hurts. It tears down. It doesn't build up. It doesn't help us in that walk towards friendship. In that other last kind of negative quadrant, we have neither of these things, failing to confront and not caring personally. Scott calls this manipulative insincerity. It's fake because it doesn't really care about us. It tells us things, but it doesn't confront us about hard things either. If someone's not telling it for our benefit, they're telling it for their own benefit, and so they're just manipulating us. That's not where we want to be. And then we get to the good quadrant. Here's where we want to be, speaking the truth in love. Confronting directly and caring personally is radical candor. It's that friendship kind of truth. When we're able to speak hard things, but maintain that relationship, let them know, like Jonathan told David, that I love you like a brother or a sister, and I care about this relationship, but I have to tell you the truth. It's powerful, it builds up, it makes us better. And so in light of that, I know that's a lot, there's a lot there, but this is a huge New Testament concept we have to understand. I want you to just think about, is there something in your relationship or a relationship or friendship that just needs a conversation? That is a huge act of faith, but important to maintain that friendship. And then lastly, I'll end here. The last quality is faith. I want you to ask yourself in your deepest friendships, how big of a role does faith play? So maybe you're thinking of a friendship this morning that friend is not a follower of Jesus. That's perfectly great. But what does that next level look like? And that next level might look like, if you haven't done this already, sharing your faith journey and talking about your faith with that person. Sometimes it can be in a really casual conversation. I don't know why, but in my own life, I felt like sometimes it's hardest to bring that faith element into a friendship that it wasn't there, or an already existing friendship. I sometimes wonder if I'm worried about hurting something or breaking something. But if we're people of faith, and if we're not having deep spiritual conversations and talking about our faith, are we really sharing our life with them? That faith needs to be broached to make that friendship deeper. Also, keep in mind, if that's your situation, that God has given you an amazing opportunity to share the love of Jesus with someone. I believe that God's put us everywhere. He's put us for a reason. And with deep friends, someone who trusts us is an opportunity to share the love of Jesus. If that friend is a follower of Jesus, we can take some other steps. We can share what God's doing in your life more regularly. We can share prayer requests with each other. I was convicted recently of some stuff that I wanted prayer over and was praying in my own life, and I just hadn't shared with anyone. So I started making some phone calls. I think that's important. We're actually going to talk about this in the last message of this series, and be encouraging one another in our faith. So we can be friends, not just like Jonathan and David, but remember, friends like Jesus. We're actually called in the Bible friends of Jesus, and Jesus is completely loyal, totally loving, absolutely truthful in all things in our life. And David had a friend like that in Jonathan. One last thing before we close, one last thought. I kept thinking in this series. So David died when he was young, and David didn't have him, or Jonathan died, and David didn't have him as a friend. If you know the story of David, towards the end of David's life, David starts waning. We see things in his own life. We have the sin with Bathsheba. And I just kept thinking, man, if Jonathan was in David's life, how different would David's life have been? I don't know the answer to that. But David, we see him sliding towards the end of life, and God sends prophet Nathan to be honest with him and give him truth in his life. But what would that role of Jonathan have been? How different would David's life have been? Because behind every giant slayer is a great friend. And so let all of us maintain stability in every deep relationship that God has given us. Will you pray with me? Father, I'm so grateful that you have given us your son Jesus, that in him we have the perfect friend. Someone who stands by us, who sees and knows every facet of our life, who through your word is completely truthful, gives us the lamp for our feet and the answer to every question, who's working in our life and working on our behalf as a great high priest in heaven. Lord, I thank you for your son Jesus. And I thank you for your teaching and your light unto our feet when it comes to friendship. Friendship is quickly in the society around us becoming rare. It's hard. There's so many things that seem like they want to trip us up and stop us. But Lord, we know that it's part of your design for us to be in relationship and be in friendships. So Lord, I just pray that you would empower us in those relationships to emulate the friendship of Jesus Christ and to love others well, and to love them with truth and love them with courage. We pray these things in the name of your son, Jesus.